Greetings, everyone. Welcome to African Esquire Show on WCC TV. I'm your host, Tierney Cherie. Today, I'm here with a special guest. Many of you probably recognize him. He's been on this channel a number of times. You've probably seen him in other places. He's also an organizer, obviously, so you might have seen him in that capacity. But I'm here with Brother Omowale, Africa. How are you, brother?
What up? What up? I'm chilling. Doing good. I can't complain.
So I'm excited for today's conversation because it's really a pressing one, something that I've been talking about a lot, and that's what's coming up if Africans don't prepare for a food crisis that has been spoken about over and over again. I think some of our people are still asleep. So I actually want to start off and play Brother Omowale's intro video. He has a documentary that he is preparing to put out. So I'm going to play the video. For everyone, if I could start it over.
We sometimes talk about world hunger as if it is.
Let me turn the volume up.
We sometimes talk about world hunger as if it is a scourge that all of us want to see abolished. That was the first sentence in a paper titled "The Benefits of World Hunger" that was put out by the UN that has now been removed from their website. My name is Omowale Africa, and I'm a documentary filmmaker here in North Carolina to talk to you all today about my upcoming project, the fight for food sovereignty in the South. We took on this new project for two reasons. One, to expose the fact that Black America is losing land at an unprecedented rate. And two, to inspire a new generation to come back south and reclaim the land. Without land, we cannot feed ourselves. And if we cannot feed ourselves, it's impossible to free ourselves. Land, power, and independence are inextricably linked. In my new documentary, Hannibal, the fight for food sovereignty in the South, we'll be exploring these topics and much more with a range of experts, scholars, and those in the know. Hit the link below and follow the campaign online at #FromFreedom to Famine.
And all of these links will be provided for the audience inside of the description. But I mean, this is such a timely project to undertake. So Brother Omowale, you can just jump in as far as first, I want to know why now, when it comes to food sovereignty. Is this something that's been burning inside of you for a while? Or is this something that the current crisis or the predictions that are happening stirred you up to want to explore this project more? Why did you choose to do this in this season?
Wow. So I guess in many ways, this project was something that was burning in me for a very long time. So back in 2016, I had got introduced to Baba Hannibal Tyrus Afrique after coming across a video that Dr. Kamal Rashid had put onto his YouTube channel. And this was a video of a lecture that he gave at Malcolm X College, I believe, that's in Chicago. He gave this lecture back in 2010, and it was called Baba Hannibal, the Exemplar of African Self-Determination. And the video really stirred something up in me because I had never heard of this elder before, never heard of this ancestor before. And I reached out to Dr. Kamal right away, yo, who is this, this Baba Hannibal? And it kind of took me down a rabbit hole because there is not a lot that you can find out about him online. You have to really talk to the streets. You have to talk to the grassroots to figure out who he is and his significance. And he's someone who, based upon my studies, based upon my conversations, has really been a 20th century / 21st century Maroon. He's been involved in a number of different formations, from reparations to land independence, of course, sovereignty, to survival training, to education, right? He was one of the founders of CB, which is the Council of Independent Black Institutions. So he sits at a very interesting cross section within the Black freedom movement, where he has placed his imprint on several formations that are critical to the convergence of crises, right, that we face right now today. So when we first, had this idea to do a project where we use Baba Hannibal and his life and his work as the canvas, the project was centered around land because, of course, you see all of the gentrification and everything that's occurring. But then as we got into the land situation, we really started to see the food situation was inextricably linked. In fact, the food situation is perhaps It's hard to say more dire because one is born of the other. But wherever you look, around the globe, but specifically the scope of this project is Black America, the situation is in a state of crisis. So we wanted to really raise an alarm. Not to give people a feeling of defeat, the problem is too big or overwhelming, so they can't do anything about it. But we wanted to empower them by inviting them to learn more about the work that has already been done, and how we can essentially bring forward that particular Black print and activate it today, because the seeds have already been planted by our ancestors.
And I think we're like at a real critical time. That's why it's like, very alarming that some people don't understand the gravity of the situation. But I think we are like at an in between, that if we don't figure this out quickly, like you said, I believe there's still hope. I think that if we can collectively pull together and, take land and actually take food sovereignty seriously, that there's a good opportunity for African people, not just in the US, but everywhere, to really be able to survive what's coming. But, it's if we don't take this serious. I mean, that was something that we talked about this past weekend at the decolonization convention. If we don't take this serious now, then it could go from being a situation that we could survive to being one that we could basically completely be demolished. Do you agree?
Yeah. Yeah, it's so very important to understand. Like I like the conversation that you and I just had on my channel, where you talked about, folks not understanding the danger of global capitalism and the existential crisis that it presents. And one of the things, when you study the history of the capitalist system, breakdowns are built into it, right? So you have these like booms and busts, right? Because this is not an organic system that is sustainable. This system requires new populations, new resources, new land masses for extraction and exploitation, right? And you already know, like, when you process something through a system, whether it's people, whether it's resources, whatever it is, like when it goes through an industrial system, you get like the waste, or the so-called like toxic waste, and then you get whatever has been created value to sell onto the market. So when you look at like how that is impacting people and impacting society, people being processed through this global capitalistic system are literally breaking down like we've never broken down before. We feel incredibly like alienated, incredibly like isolated, incredibly like we have this maladaptive dependency on this system for our survival, right? Because we have to sell our labor into this very system that is exploiting us and dominating us, and ultimately like killing the planet. So it's a very serious situation that we find ourselves in. But what's interesting is that the architects of this system historically have tried to create legislations to keep the system alive during periods of breakdown, right? So if we look back, 1929, the so-called Great Depression, well, you got the New Deal that came out of that, and you saw other like breakdowns that occurred in the 20th century, and you saw legislation come out of that. But if you look at this neoliberal period that's occurred from 1970 to where we are, what the business owners and the capitalist class did was they basically corralled their power to declaw the system, so that when the next breakdown comes, there would be no legislation that would be able to be pushed through to essentially claw back some of the wealth or some of the gains from the 1% to redistribute those gains to the masses of people who are suffering. So now we're in this state, since we've entered into the 21st century, of perpetual crisis, right? You had the financial, the banking crisis in the early 2000s, right? You have the housing crisis that is still with us right now, and you have the debt crisis that is still here with us right now, and now you have the food crisis. And it was a very good article. There were two good articles that I'm going to tell your viewers they should check out, released on May 19th, 2022. The one was in The Guardian. It's called The Banks Collapsed in 2008, and our food system is about to do the same. So that's in The Guardian. And then The Economist put out an article on the same date, May 19th, 2022, Malcolm X's birthday, called The Coming Food Catastrophe, right? And I'll share the links with you so you can share them with your audience. But, when we were thinking about this doc, we had no idea that, so much energy was about to be put into like the, the global food catastrophe. Of course, everybody is now trying to blame it on like Ukraine and Russia. But the reality is, in many ways, this is once again capitalism exploiting a bad situation for profit, right? Because the global food system, the global industry, there are like a handful of players that control it all, and we're all dependent on that system to eat. What they can do in situations like this is start the price gouge. So in the global South, the food shortage and the fuel shortage is often driven by these arbitrary price increases just for an opportunity to really grab as much profit, right, during times of chaos, right? So you look at places like Panama, like Sri Lanka, like people are already like up in arms, like burning things down, like unrest is everywhere. Of course, I mean, for like the last 4 or 5 years, you had, over in France, the yellow vests, you look up in Canada with like the truckers, all of these situations that are a response to, IMF policies, World Bank policies, like these global policies that have a stronghold on global society and is really decaying the systems that we depend on. So like, we don't have a choice. Like food sovereignty isn't something like, oh, it would be nice to have. It's either like food sovereignty or slavery. It's like food sovereignty or starvation. So this isn't something like, oh yeah, it would be nice to get that. Like, it's no, you don't have a choice. It's like you need it like air at this point.
Absolutely. I actually want to show people real quick the cover of that magazine article from The Economist, because it's I feel like a lot of this has just been, very much planned, honestly. But this is like the image that they used on the front cover. And if you look closely, like it looks like grains standing away. When you look closely, it's skulls. So something interesting, like I noticed, like just from the system, like they're talking about the food crisis, but they're not talking about the gravity of it. Like they're dropping hints, like I feel like they're dropping hints like this is going to wipe out potentially a lot of people if we don't get on board with this. But they're trying to stay abstract and say, oh, this is going to lead to some devastation and things like that. And so I think it's really on us, African people, to sound the alarm. Like, no, this is not just another famine or, another dry season. Like this is something that they're actually pushing that can have genocidal effects. So
yes.
I want to ask you, like, there's so many ways that you can tackle this subject. How are you choosing to go about it inside of the documentary? Because it can be a huge subject, food sovereignty. So how are you going to address it?
So we were having this debate, myself and my media partner, in terms of like the scope of the discussion, right? So the name of the documentary is Hannibal: The Fight for Food Sovereignty in the South. Now, those last 3 words, in the South, it was a big discussion because I was arguing like, yo, food sovereignty is such a big discussion that if we don't define the scope of where we are talking about, of course, this struggle is going to apply because it's a global struggle. So people can look at this story and draw strength and hints and insight for how to solve their own situation. But when we talk about it, I felt like it was best to talk about it in somewhat of a linear historical unfolding of our struggle right here in Black America, right? Because that's the audience who ultimately we're speaking to with this project. Of course, we called it Hannibal, right? The fight. So Hannibal, you think Hannibal Barca, but we're talking about Hannibal Tyrus Afrique, right? A warrior general from Black America who has, inspired the likes of Mama Marimba Ani, Walimu Barudi. He was eulogized in 2011 when he passed away by the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. And Farrakhan went as far as to say that after the Honorable Elijah Muhammad passed away, it was Baba Hannibal Afrique who, came to him and helped him to basically find his purpose for how to basically, reintroduce the Nation of Islam. So Baba Hannibal is somebody who's been just deeply just respected across like the Black freedom movement. And I think that this is a special honor to reintroduce him or to introduce him and his work to this particular generation. And mind you, we're really just using him as the canvas to tell a story that we can start in slavery and bring forward to today. Because, during periods of enslavement, we know that they use starvation as a tool of control. They also used it. It was both reward and punishment. So they would punish you by denying you food, but they would reward you. Like in the case of if you read Frederick Douglass's slave narrative, he talks about when they were planning their escape, right? And there were two dudes who snitched on them, and the guys who snitched, right, they got rewarded with like hot butter biscuits, right? So I know people joke about butter biscuits today, but that was a real like part of the narrative. And then there's just so much to be had in terms of unpacking this conversation. Another good stat that we kind of like unearthed, right, that some a scholar had put out a book back in 2012 talking about the hidden legacy of emancipation. And one thing that we did not know was that during Reconstruction, right, the period of 1862 to 1870, we lost damn near 25% of our emancipated ancestors died due to starvation and illness, right? So that's a part of our freedom story that we don't get told, right? And then even more important to that, when we talk about like the timeline, I tell people, well, the perfect place for us to start this timeline is January 12th, 1865, because that's when you had 20 black preachers in Savannah, Georgia, who met with General William T. Sherman following the Civil War, and General William T. Sherman asked them a series of questions. There were 12 questions in total, but question 3 and 4 were the most important. Question 3, he asked them, like, how do y'all plan to live, and how can the government assist y'all in maintaining y'all freedom? And he said, well, listen, we need land. If we have land, we can work the land. Our women, our children, and our elders, we can all work to collectively as a community to maintain ourselves. And our able-bodied men, we can make them of service to the government by like they can join the military or whatever, right? So that was question 3. Then question 4, he asked them, well, in which way do y'all want to live? Do y'all want to live scattered among the whites or in colonies by yourself, meaning like separate communities, right? And all of them, all but one, said that they wanted to live like separate. So this is an important part of our history, because 3 weeks after that, we know we get field order number 15, known as like 40 acres and a mule, right? So from there to where we are today, there's been this struggle, this fight for both land and our ability to feed ourselves off the land that has just been like untold. And I'll just add one more point, and I'm sorry for over talking here, but the last point I'll add is that in the 55-year period from emancipation to 1920, Black Americans had acquired nearly, I believe it was 16 million acres of land, right? So in 1920, we had land in proportion to our population. So we had 14% of the land, right? The land acreage in the United States, the formable land, the agricultural, I'm messing up the word here, but the formable land, right? We had roughly 14% of that. So this is in 1920. From 1920 to 2017, we went from 14% to a half of 1%. Right. So we are in such a dire situation. And that land theft that happened with the assistance of the US government. So it's like this is a very, very significant story. And right now, like I said, we had no idea this crisis would be here right when we started talking about this project, but it is here now. And so the project is very timely.
So I want to get into like, I guess the solution that you're offering as far as reclaim the land. So everyone who knows, who's watched this channel for a while knows I'm like, get out of America type person, like, but I also understand the sentiment of like, let's go down south and, form communities that are independent. So one, like, are you arguing that that's the program? Like for those who don't want to repatriate, basically you need to go down south. Could those things be achieved up north possibly? Like what is it about the South that makes, things more opportune for actual food sovereignty?
Yeah. So I feel you on the perspective. Like a lot of our brothers and sisters talk about like repatriation. So like historically, we've always pursued one of 4 political strategies, right? As Black people in the United States, either immigration, meaning you migrate to somewhere, within the diaspora. Like we know folks like Martin Delaney were talking about like going to Central America, also talking about like going to Haiti. So that was always a solution. Repatriation, meaning going back to Africa. Integration, meaning living scattered among the white people. And the 4th has always been like independence, right? Sovereignty, us creating space here in the US. So I would argue that of all the strategies, like I support repatriation for folks who want to go back to Africa, but the reality is The transatlantic slave trade has forever altered the global makeup of society. So we have a huge African population in the diaspora. So there's never going to be a situation in which all people from Haiti or the Bahamas or Jamaica or Brazil just pick up and go back to Africa. So I wouldn't ask African Americans to do that either. So from my perspective, we have to create a multipolar African world. Just like the Europeans have different metropoles of power, right? From DC to New York to France to Germany, to different European metropoles where they essentially manage their power and dominate the world. I think that we as Black people can create something similar. However, being a Garveyite, I recognize that all of that is for naught if we don't have a Pan-African state on the continent, right, that is strong enough and powerful enough to protect the interests of African people everywhere. But that being said, wherever African people find themselves, we have to be organized to protect our political, cultural, and economic interests. So those of us here in the United States, the South has always been our best hope strategically. You understand what I'm saying? And Booker T. Washington gets a very bad rap from, and I understand why he gets the bad rap that he gets, but he was on the money in terms of where we needed to so-called cast down your buckets where you are. In the South was on the land there, on our ancestral land where our ancestors were enslaved for many generations, right? This is where we have the numbers on our side. This is where we have probably some of the most formidable land within the U.S. We had all of the political and economic advantages on our side in this geographic location. Going to the north to these urban centers, it was because industrialization. So people were coming north for factory jobs, but of course there was also famine in the South that some people were running from because of the structural systems that create the realities that we as Black people have to deal with within the system of racism, white supremacy. However, that being said, I feel like when we are organized, right, when we are strongly organized and clear as to what we have to do for ourselves, we have always been able to do well within the South, right? I think that one of the big differences between us today and our ancestors, especially post-emancipation, closer to slavery, was they understood clearly that white society, that there was a prejudice and racism that could not be overcome. But more importantly, the institutions of white society would not care for us. So therefore, we understood that we had to create our own institutions and organizations to do and provide the things for us that larger society wouldn't provide. I think post-integration, all of those institutions that we had, whether it was the Black church, the Black press, the Black fraternal organizations, the Black racial uplift organizations, all were disintegrated post-integration for a seat on the Democratic Party plantation. So essentially, most of the organizations within the Black community became an auxiliary group of the Democratic Party. You know what I mean? So our community is basically managed, by that particular situation. And it's what's created, like I say, this maladaptive dependence, that we kind of find ourselves in. So if we want to talk real liberation, there's been, you have the Republic of New Africa, you have, in the early 2000s, NAPO, the New African People's Organization, they created something called the Jackson Kush Plan, right, which was an idea for creating dual power in the South, right? So meaning creating legislative power, but also independent people power and having different forms of indigenous-based local government. So there's all types of formations that have been developed, but by and large, Black people have not been willing to walk away from, electoral politics, from Democratic Party politics, from the hope of something better by being loyal to the status quo. But I think that once we see that there's no reward coming from maintaining the status quo, which is why I created my documentary, The Un-American Dilemma, to kind of break from that illusion, that Malcolm was trying to break us from. Because once we figure that out, And I love this because John Boyd, who is the president of the national chair of the Black Farmers Association, he literally just went on MSNBC and said, I think it's time for us to give up on the government. Like, hearing him say that lets me know that, okay, people are waking up, because once you reach that conclusion, that's not a sit on your hands conclusion. That's a, okay, now I have to like get real. I have to get organized for power. If I got to take the land, whatever I got to do to survive, I have to do it. And once you reach that, that's where you have real revolutionary potential and potential for true transformation of the populace. So that's what I hope to see.
So, like, trying to visualize how this could happen, how this would happen. Do you foresee, like, is your goal with this documentary, maybe like as a starting point, seeing just different Africans watch the documentary and like, okay, like, you know, I'm going to go, you know, just invest in land myself, or like, is it like a organized effort, like collective, you know, what was it, the Great Migration, but reverse? Like, how do you foresee like this program, you know, incrementally basically coming into being some type of real sovereignty for Africans?
Absolutely. So the objective of this documentary, I keep telling people that the goal is very simple. It's not meant to be one of those feel good, oh, like I learned about history, I learned about heroes, and like I feel great about something we did in the past. Like, no, that's not what it is. Like, we want to give you inspiration, but more importantly, right, the goal is to give you the inspiration and information to facilitate your activation, right? We want people to be active participants in their own liberation. We want you to become an active participant in your own economic transformation. And like, once you get the political, I'm sorry, I'm rhyming here, I'm not meaning to do that, but like, once you get the political education, to understand, like, here go another rhyme, situation, to understand the situation. Like, I'm pardon me, because I'm
a rapper, right? That's
I'm not trying to rhyme. I promise you, like, it's coming out like this, but I'm really not trying to do that. So I apologize. But you know, like I said, the goal is to provide our family with the inspiration and information to facilitate their activation, right? And if you look to the South, one thing that's interesting right now within the Black body politic here in the U.S. is, because of the economic anxiety and because of the fear it is producing, you have chaos by and large within the masses. Some of that chaos is starting to mature a little bit to try to basically do the same thing a slightly different way. So what I mean by that is, on the integrationist side, there's this guy, Charles Blow. He's a journalist for the New York Times. You probably see him on CNN all the time. He wrote a book called The Devil We Know. So essentially, his whole thesis, it's like a Republic of New Africa thesis, but in red, white, and blue. You know, it's the Democratic Party's version. It's like this how we could attain strength within the Democratic Party, by going back to the South. Now, I like the idea of us going back to the South and attaining power. However, if we're just trying to do more of the same old, like, nah. So we need a project that also says come back to the South, but still maintains a revolutionary posture. I'm even okay with the idea of dual power. I'm okay with us, you know, like they're doing down in Jackson, Mississippi, right? The Jackson Kush plan. I'm okay with us taking elected power. But more importantly than an elected power, I think the people power, indigenous and communal power has to be established. And that's only done through organizations. So I'm not calling for the creation of a mass-based organization, because the competition and power and ego trip that comes from that, I think that we've saw the failures that history has presented from that situation. But I am arguing for local-based grassroots organizing that is that is open to coalition building, right? That is open to us identifying the problems that we have in common and figuring out how we organize the limited resources, political and economic, that we have to meet those particular challenges, right? So organization is absolutely what I am calling for, but I'm not saying, hey, this is the Omowale organization, everybody come and join this to solve the problem. Like, that's not what I'm doing at all with the project.
Understood. So, and the GoFundMe and everyone, please do support this effort. The GoFundMe link is going to be again in the description. You pulled a quote that said slaves were regularly starved to so that their masters could exercise control over their property. And something I think is very interesting happening right now. It's been a lot of reports that Bill Gates, of all people, who to me is someone that a lot of people should be concerned about, particularly in the African liberation struggle, and not think that there's someone who's coming to help us, but some people think he's trying to help us. He's been buying up a lot of farmland in America. I just saw July 5th, it was reported he won approval to buy
a potato farm in Dakota.
Yeah, 2,100 acres. It's crazy that this billionaire who, you know, is in so many aspects of like the globalist society. So he's in like a lot of the health aspects of the globalist society, obviously, but also at the same time, the farming and trying to control the land. What problems do the globalist agenda present to Africans as we start reclaiming our land?
So they're severe because independent people and sovereignty comes in direct conflict with the globalist agenda. And it's unfortunate that you can't even have this conversation today without people like essentially putting you in the conspiracy like wheelhouse. But like globalism is a real paradigm, and what they are looking to create, from my perspective, very much looks like a eco-friendly slavery. You know what I mean? Like they use these codes, sustainable and organic, like they have excellent marketing and PR for what they are trying to bring about. But ultimately, what they're trying to bring about is complete control over your life and all of the life-sustaining institutions that you depend on. And with that control, they are trying to engineer the behavior of society to achieve certain goals. One of their biggest goals that they're unshy about talking about is in order for the resources on the planet to be maldistributed in the fashion that they are, meaning 1% of the people controlling 99% of the resources, then it requires a mass decrease in the other 99% of the population in order for that 1% to remain comfortable. Because that 99% it creates situations for unrest, right? When like, you got all these economic tremors and fuel and food and fertilizer, like the 3Fs, it creates a situation where the 1% become very insecure because they've hoarded all the wealth. So now they're building these huge private militaries, right? They puppeteer the so-called liberal governments, right? Because corporations basically control the governments, and we know the 1%, the ownership class, control the corporation. So it's like they have layers in between that protect them. So we, the people of the planet, our interests for survival is in direct opposition to their interests. And right now it's asymmetrical power because they are organized. They have militaries, they have mercenaries, they have hired militias because they control both sides of the table. So we continue to try to operate as individuals when the only way to meet this challenge is in an organized front. I mean, I don't know if you're into like the sci-fi and dystopian, but like the greatest analogy is that of if you watch like Star Wars, where you got like the Empire and the Rebels, right? The Empire represents the 1%. They're consuming all the resources. They're colonizing planets, right? And the Rebels represent the people who want to maintain closeness with the earth, who value the earth, who value the environment, who want to live in a truly sustainable way that is not profit driven. You understand? Like that's what the rebels or the indigenous represent. And unfortunately, right, when you talk about the globalists and their agenda for population decrease, a huge burden of that decrease in planetary population is going to be placed on the shoulders of African people, right? So Europeans are already like their birth rates are already a negative. If you look at Africa, it's the fastest growing population, African youth, has the youngest population. So what they're doing with the different ideologies and distractions and entertainment that they are trying to use to modify the neural architecture of Black people to basically turn off that survival instinct and make us essentially menticidal. They are doing it at mass scale, and all these tools of social media and mass media today and communications help them to do it in a way that they've never been able to do it before. Like, they literally have technology. They've got it to the point where they can, hack your biology, your sociology, and you'll be just marching to their tune of marching you off the planet. So we are in direct opposition with the globalists.
Yeah, and I could talk about Bill Gates all day, because there's just so much when it comes to him. Like you said, the depopulation, the theory that they've been saying over and over again, different globalist entities, that Africans are too many of us, even though the land that we come from is obviously able to feed all of us if we become properly organized. But that's definitely, I agree, it's going to be a huge problem that we can't ignore, and we can't just like write people off as conspiracy theorists. The other thing we have to keep in mind is that these people control the media, and if you control CNN and MSNBC, you're the one giving donations to them, then of course, like, anytime that someone has a legitimate criticism of you, you're going to be silenced. So I think people have to remember, like, don't think because someone points out Bill Gates, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're right wing. That's the way that.
Well, let me give you some fun information. On my birthday, January 25th, 2022, there was a study put out by Grow Intelligence. It's called U.S. Potato Production Decline Deepens Global Supply Shortage, right? So at the beginning of 2022, they were talking about this global shortage in potatoes. And then all of a sudden, you get Bill Gates buying a $13.5 million potato farm, right? And the people there were like, they were trying to stop him from getting it. But of course, they control the situation, so they ended up getting it. Another good piece of information, the UN, another globalist instrument. About 2 weeks ago, there was an article that was circulating widely on Twitter that was posted in the UN Chronicle back in 2009. The name of the article was The Benefits of World Hunger. Since that article went viral on Twitter, the UN scraped it from their website. So the only place you can get access to the article now is on InfoWars. There's a few other people who snatched it down, but it was called The Benefits of World Hunger. So that's why in the video you played at the beginning, I started off with a quote from that article. It said, "We sometimes talk about world hunger as if it is a scourge that should be abolished." Right. That's the first sentence in the article where they're talking about the benefits of world hunger.
I got to read that article now. That's crazy.
I got it.
Okay, thanks. So you're going to send it to me. Last question I have, and then you could close out with any other information you want to give the people. In your studies, obviously, you're going to be talking about a lot of historical figures, a lot of people who paved the way for us. Are there any current people that you came across who are right now doing something like that we can look to as like a current inspiration in reclaiming the land?
Yes, there's a huge food sovereignty movement. Nothing on mass acreage, but like, for an example, like urban guerrilla farming is really, really big, like across, within the hood, to be real. People are basically going and claiming land. They're not buying it, and they're just setting up shop and plant. So they're locking themselves in this conflict with the local, municipalities who basically are doing the bidding of the developer class. And what's unfortunate is we got a lot of Black culture vultures, right? So you got a lot of Black politicians who are becoming the face of the developer class, being put into position to protect them, and they're using PR to kind of pitch this as if it's something that is good for Black people. But within the documentary, we're going to cover the movement of guerrilla urban growers, people who are snatching up land, snatching up plots, and growing food for their local community. We're going to cover that, but also we're going to cover the counter movement to that, because just like when the Panthers started their food program in order to counter that in its revolutionary posture, the government had to create something. Right now, the non-for-profit sector is now coming in and dumping free produce onto the hood. And it's like, that's not sustainable, right? And they're only doing that to counter this revolutionary action where people were snatching up lots and plots of land and growing on it. So now you got the non-for-profits coming in, and of course they're using black people. So, you know, you feel good handing out food to the hood, but it's coming from a poison tree. It is non-for-profits are now doing this to control. Whenever they fund you to either control the movement, to kill the movement, or to redirect the movement, right? So now we got to be careful, because what they'll try to do is they'll try to shift the conversation from food sovereignty to food security. And it's like, no, that's not the conversation. Food security is not sustainable for us. Food security still keeps us 100% dependent on the global food industry, which is collapsing. We need to be talking about food sovereignty. And the reason why they don't want you talking about food sovereignty, because there's no food sovereignty without land sovereignty, right? So the two are inextricably linked. And once people make that connection, it's like, oh, like, I can't survive on this planet if I'm not free. Anything else is slavery. Then you can inspire people to stand up, to fight, and to do something. And that's what good propaganda is meant to do. And this is what this is. It is a propaganda effort. I'm telling you up front, it's a propaganda effort. We're giving this to you to inspire you to be activated and to participate in your own freedom.
That's why I cringe when I hear Africans use words like food desert. Like, okay, we get it, like what you're trying to say. But one, from my observation, that's a term that really came from the white liberal establishment. And two, the issue is not just that we need a Whole Foods in the hood, like we need things that we control. So you're trying to basically supplant the food sovereignty issue by just saying, oh, well, as long as we have access to fresh food. No, there's a bigger problem here. We're dependent on them to be the ones that's going to give it to us. And I also just to piggyback off what you're saying, I was doing a lot of research on like food cooperatives that do exist. And of course, when you're on the internet, you're not going to find as much as, is out there, because obviously, Google will tell you which ones they want you to see. But like a lot of the ones that I did find, even, with African people as a face, we rely on grants from a lot of these foundations,
Mm-hmm.
people who have adverse agendas to us. And so that's another danger, I think, of like the food sovereignty movement is, getting comfortable with applying for a grant, to basically do something. But you should know these people, they're never going to fund your sovereignty. Like they have a direct opposition to that, to that sovereignty. So I think that's another big issue too.
Yeah.
You got anything else to say? Or
no, you right on point. You are you right on point. Like this particular project really does excite me, because like I said, we couldn't have known when we started to have conversations about potentially doing it that this the reverse sanctions would hit. Essentially, Biden sanctioned Russia, and the sanctions on Russia are being borne by everybody but Russia. So we had no idea that this manufactured crisis would be here, but it's here. Because somebody came into my mentions and was like, this is being manufactured. And I said, listen, Katrina was a real crisis. Whether the levees were blown up or whether they, were weak and they just came down on their own, we still dealt with the outcome. So in this situation, we still have to deal with the outcome. If they're manufacturing the food crisis or if it's organic, we still are left with the crisis. The question is, how do we meet the challenge?
Exactly. So thank you so much, Brother Omowale. Anything else you want to tell the people before you close out?
Please go support. We have 9 days left in the crowdfund. You can go right to our Indiegogo. It's linked in the description. The beauty of a crowdfund is nobody has to give a lot. When a lot of people give a little, it helps us to achieve the goal, right? If you want to give a lot, you can give a lot. There's various different perks, that you can, claim on the Indiegogo site. The highest perk you can claim is $5,000 if you want to contribute. And for that, you get a dinner with me, a private dinner with the director. So that's the highest perk. And the lowest perk, I think, is $19. But you can contribute anything. You can go to Indiegogo and give $2, $3, $4. When a lot of people give a little, how they say, many hands makes the load lighter. That's an African proverb, right? So let's all pitch in. And Sister Tyranny, I appreciate you and your audience for the platform.
Thank you. So wait, so you're going to fly like anywhere where someone donates?
If you get $5,000, I will come to your city and we will
That's
have a private dinner, and we can talk about whatever.
Awesome. That's a good one. So thanks so much, Brother Omowale. And again, everyone, please support. This is a big one. This is a really dire time. We've talked about this a number of times on this channel. This is something that we can't slack on. So I'm really grateful that you're doing this. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm definitely going to go over and support, and I hope
I got one last question.
Yeah, go ahead.
What can we do to get you in a documentary? Like if we want to interview you as a special guest, an expert, could we get Sister Charity in the documentary?
Of course. I'd be honored. All right, thanks. I'll look forward to that email or text. So thanks everyone for watching. I will see you all in the next video.
All right, peace.